the Center for Health and Safety Culture, which is located at Montana State University. We focus on growing health and safety and improving health and safety in communities. We work on a variety of issues at the center. So today we're specifically talking about substance abuse prevention, which is a main focus of ours. We also work on traffic safety. We work on child maltreatment prevention, violence prevention, problem gambling prevention, suicide prevention, all sorts of ways to improve health and safety at the community level. My name is Katie Dively, and I have been working for the center for about 8 years, and in my role, I'm a research scientist, but really what that looks like is putting research that we conduct into practice and supporting communities as they do that. So we translate research through training, so I'm a trainer, and then also a community guide, helping communities implement their prevention programs and strategies along with our positive culture framework. My co-presenter today is Molly. Molly, why don't you say hello?
Great. Hi, everybody. Nice to be on the call with you. I have
Molly, introduce yourself, Molly.
I just wanted to say I've been in your shoes. I've worked in substance abuse prevention for about 10 years in some way, shape, or form, working with coalitions, and I've worked directly under a drug-free communities grant and have worked really closely with about 20 coalitions across the Midwest. So I empathize with the situation you're all in right now.
Absolutely, and Molly has a profound amount of experience at working specifically on the DFC grant. I locally have worked with many DFC grants. I've also been part of a DFC coalition in my own community, but never done the day in and day out work as a coordinator like Molly has, so she'll be a great asset. I'm calling in from my office, which is in Wisconsin. Molly's actually calling in from her office in Minneapolis, in the Minneapolis area. So welcome. Today we will be recording the webinar and posting it to our website. You can see the address there. We do this so that you can listen again if you need, or share this with others that would like to call or that would like to listen in later. If we do have your phone lines muted, and that helps us with the quality of the recording, so we appreciate you keeping those lines muted. If you do have a question, you are absolutely welcome to enter that into the chat box or the question box. We will see those, and we will try to answer them either as they come in or wait till the end where we will have a time for you to ask questions. If for any reason you cannot hear, just simply hang up and dial back in. We will be here. So a little bit about ourselves at the Center for Health and Safety Culture. We are an interdisciplinary center, meaning that our staff comes from not only across the nation, but also from a variety of different backgrounds. My background is public health. We have engineering, psychology, behavioral science, organizational leadership, sociology, we have statistics, a whole range of folks with different backgrounds working to serve communities and organizations through research. And then one of the missions of the university is to get that research out into practice and to get that into the local communities. So we do that through training and guidance, so support that we provide ongoing to different communities that we work with to cultivate healthy and safe cultures. This is a map of the projects that we either are working on right now or that we've worked on in the past. And please feel free to visit our website, and you may click on any of these bubbles, and they can tell you a little bit more about what that project was or what that project currently is. So we've worked across the country a lot, as well as in Canada. The purpose of the webinar today is to provide you first off with an overview of the positive culture framework, and then specifically we want to describe how that framework can be used as you prepare for your 2017 grant application, and then we'll discuss opportunities for how the framework can enhance your prevention efforts at the local level. Something that we absolutely need to note is that we cannot answer any specific questions relating to your eligibility for the DFC grant. That definitely needs to be left up to those in the DFC Support Program. So please do guide your specific questions relating to the grant to those folks. You may have noticed in the past couple of days that the ONDCP website is no longer functioning. I believe that's because of transition of administration, so that site is down now. However, we did some digging, and you can still find those grant documents on the SAMHSA website. So if you even just put in DFC grant within the search engine on the SAMHSA website, you can still find the documents relating to the grant, the FOA, and different documentation that you need to fill out the grant. So some handouts. You were emailed a set of handouts. The green and white handout is the Positive Culture Framework Overview. That provides you a much more detailed account of what I will be presenting to you early on in this webinar. We wanted you to have that in writing so that when you go to write your grant and you wanted to pull out snippets of the framework and write that in, that you would have all those details in front of you. So you do have that. And then the other handout that you see on the left is the specific handout for this webinar. You can hold tight to that for a moment. I will be walking through the framework first, and then Molly will go through some of the specifics on that handout. So we'll let you know when it is time to pick that up. What you see in front of you today is a picture of a framework. I'm going to be walking through the name Positive Culture Framework over the next few slides. You'll see that picture of a framework, and I put that there intentionally because I want to describe to you the difference between a program and a strategy and a framework. So a framework, like the Positive Culture Framework, is a way of organizing your specific strategies. So if you want to engage in a systematic or scientific method of selecting the appropriate strategies for your community, you can engage in a framework like the Positive Culture Framework. The Positive Culture Framework doesn't come shipped to you in a box like another strategy might, like a curriculum or something like that. So I just wanted to provide that understanding that this is a framework for engaging in prevention and a way to organize your efforts. So it's the positive, which will kind of break down what we mean by that, what culture is, and then the framework, and I'll walk through what that framework looks like. So our core assumption at the Center for Health and Safety Culture is that the positive exists and that it's worth growing. This is definitely a theme that we saw in the DFC grant application this year in 2017. They specifically ask you to describe the strengths of the community that contribute to a positive impact on youth and how to build on those strengths. So that is just how the Positive Culture Framework operates. Using existing positive qualities or strengths and seeking to grow them. We do all of our work sort of based on this assumption that the positive exists and it's worth growing. So it exists in ourselves, in our neighbors, in our community, in the youth in our community, and its leaders, and that our work in prevention is about growing these healthy behaviors and attitudes rather than just decreasing risk behaviors. Now, this is a little bit different of an approach than a fear-based strategy. We really believe that showing people what works and the positive attitudes and behaviors that are common within a community, and then seeking to shift them towards those behaviors, and that gives them energy. And it gives us energy as prevention leaders to do that work. And we need to talk about the importance of hope. Ultimately, we're here to change behavior, to grow healthier behaviors, and this requires hope. Hope motivates people towards action, and this slide reads that momentum for change requires large amounts of positive affect, such as social bonding, attitudes such as hope, inspiration, and sheer joy of creating with one another. So again, it's not just about leading people towards hope and allowing that to allow behavior change, but also our coalition as well. So we have to think about this, not only the youth or the individuals that we're seeking to address with our grant, but also we're seeking to change behaviors of our coalition members for them to advocate for prevention, et cetera. So we really want this notion of hope to be anchored in our work. But we also need to talk about concern. It's imperative that people understand the harms and the concerns about the behavior choices that they're making, specifically around alcohol and other drugs. But research shows us that it's really important to anchor them with that sense of hope. Essentially, we need to tell them about these dangers, right, but also empower them with a sense of hope to make that change that we're desiring. And now this is very different than fear. Concern and fear are far different. Fear is more of an unpleasant emotion that's caused by the belief of that someone or something is dangerous and it can be a threat, right? Fear can cause this instinctive action. However, it can be paralyzing and it can stop us in our tracks. And according to research, it is not the most effective way to address one of these issues, to address risk behavior. Concern, on the other hand, is a bit different. It causes us to think and allows us time to move forward at the same time. So it doesn't paralyze us in our tracks. It sort of stops and makes us think. Often people will say it makes them think about caring and feelings and, to some degree, accepting responsibility for action. So there's a bit of a cognitive aspect, the reason for being concerned, as well as sort of an emotional aspect, the feeling surrounding being concerned. So while fear appeals can be effective at gaining instant attention of people, researchers have challenged whether or not they're effective at changing behavior and keeping that behavior changed long term. And isn't that really what we're looking for, is to change to healthier, safer behaviors and to sustain them long term? So from our research at the center, we've really learned that a positive approach that seeks to build on hope and grow what is currently working is really our aim. And again, it's about attracting, a sense of attracting people towards something rather than continually pushing them away from something, saying, don't do this, don't do that. Let's more attract them towards something. So that's a bit about the positive within the framework, the positive. And now let's talk a bit about culture. And we want to come back a bit and specifically talk about how culture influences behavior, because ultimately we are here to grow healthy behaviors among youth. But in order to talk about these behaviors, we need to really, or to address these behaviors, we need to talk about what's driving these behaviors. So at the far right side of this very simplified behavior model, and if this simplified behavior model represents one individual, and this is just a pared down version of a much more complex model that we use, but if on the far right is the behavior we're seeking to address, and let's just say for sake of argument today that's underage drinking, just to pick one, we want to look at what is driving somebody's decision to drink if they're underage. So if somebody has willingness, right, if they're willing to drink at age 17, they're more likely to engage in that behavior. Or if they make plans or they have intentions of engaging in that behavior, we know they're more likely to engage in that behavior. So let's back up a step. What makes somebody more willing or have the intention of engaging in a behavior like underage drinking? Well, that comes from their attitudes and beliefs on the subject. So if I have favorable attitudes towards drinking, like I think it's cool, then I'm more likely to be willing to engage in that behavior or make plans to engage in that behavior. If I have beliefs that are favorable to underage drinking, such as I believe it's not harmful, I believe my friends are doing it, I really don't think I'm going to get into any trouble from doing it, then I'm more likely to have willingness and have intention to engage in that behavior. But keep in mind the opposite is also true. So if we have unfavorable attitudes, like I do not think it's cool to drink underage, I do not think it's going to make me a better dancer or make me be more social, then I'm less likely to engage in that behavior. And the same is true for beliefs. So if we have protective beliefs, meaning that, boy, I think it's really dangerous, I know that my parents have rules about this and I'm going to get in trouble and law enforcement could possibly catch me, and I don't think most of my friends are doing it, those are all protective beliefs that we want to grow because that will reduce their willingness and their intention to engage in that behavior. But it does beg the question, where are these formulated? Where do we get our attitudes and beliefs about particular behaviors? And we really find in the science that this comes from our value system. So while our value system is much more broad in nature and doesn't necessarily specifically tie to a behavior like underage drinking, it's more around the notion of health and safety. So if we have a value system around health and safety, often we have more protective attitudes and beliefs about particular behaviors like underage drinking. See how that sort of goes in line there. But it also makes us ask the question, well, where do our values come from? How do we get these values? And we believe very much that this comes from outside. This comes from our culture. And we would say that our values, attitudes, and beliefs really start to formulate what we have termed cultural factors, these shared values, attitudes, and beliefs that impact health and safety. And that this area here of our cultural factors becomes the basis for our efforts, for our prevention efforts. If we can understand the values in our community and the current attitudes and beliefs, then boy, we know where to pinpoint our efforts so that we can change behaviors. And you might also equate this to your local conditions, right? Those local conditions that talk about, okay, what are the current beliefs around underage drinking among youth or marijuana use? So the cultural factors. And we start to think about culture of a community, it can become a little bit overwhelming. We know that there are many layers within a community, and the social ecological model helps us break down these different layers and these different relationships. So the social ecology recognizes these different layers of relationships, and it helps us understand how culture impacts an individual's attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors. We know that individuals do not operate in isolation, but that they are profoundly impacted by those around them. They're impacted by their peers and their family. They're impacted by the schools that they belong to, or if our focus population happens to be parents, we know that the work sites that they belong to can have an impact on their attitudes, their beliefs, their behaviors, and absolutely our community at large. What our community norms are, what our policies are, which are often codifying our norms, and how those policies are enforced play a role on the individual. So knowing that all of these influences play a role in our own attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors, we know then that we need to take a look at this at a community level. And what we would say is looking at this as a cultural approach, taking a look at strategies, not only assessing different layers of the social ecology, what's going on among individuals in our focused population, but also maybe within their families, what's going on with schools, what are law enforcement doing about the issue, what are key leaders doing about the issue, but that we also need to have strategies at each of these levels. Because it's not enough just to, let's say, teach an individual that smoking marijuana can impact the brain at a young level if that is not reinforced at these different layers of the social ecology throughout their existence. So in order to truly transform our community, we need to have a cultural approach looking at each of these levels of the social ecology. So that's where the notion of culture comes in. So we've got positive, we've got culture, and now let's look at the framework. So this is a picture of the framework, and we really see this as a way of organizing our prevention efforts. On the far right, that's our outcome, right, the green arrow, and you'll notice that it's about growing something. It's an upward pointing arrow. It's about growing aspect of the positive. It's about growing health and safety. And we do that by increasing protective behaviors and decreasing risk behaviors across that social ecology. And how do we do that? Well, if you think back to that simplified behavior model, we really need to look at those cultural factors or those shared values, attitudes, and beliefs that impact behavior and take a look at those across the social ecology so that we can improve health and safety. But how do we do that? Well, we have a process for doing that. So a 7-step process is outlined here in this circle. I'll provide a quick overview of that, and then I'll talk about three key skills that we believe prevention leaders should be focusing in on. So the first step is planning and advocating. Step 1 is really important, and step 1 lays the foundation for all of our future steps and can often take quite a bit of time. This is where we're planning our efforts. We're starting to focus in on who do we want to serve? What is our focus population? What are the issues we're seeking to address? Who are our stakeholders? How do I bring stakeholders in? It's about, building your coalition and building your capacity and the coalition's capacity. You're making your plans, your timelines. You're creating an evaluation plan. And possibly, most importantly, we're advocating for prevention. That's where the advocacy comes in. We always have to not only advocate for prevention, but I would say advocating for a positive approach to prevention rather than a fear-based approach. Step 2 is where we're assessing our culture. This is where we're starting to determine what is currently going on in the culture, what's going on among youth. If we have the resources, can we also assess what's going on with parents or community leaders, etc.? So step 2 is assessing culture. Step 3 is where we are learning from our assessment and we're starting to prioritize issues. Once we've prioritized issues, we want to develop a portfolio of strategies in step 4. We know that there is no silver bullet. It's a little bit more like silver buckshot, where we need several strategies in order to effectively reduce marijuana use, prescription drug use, alcohol use, and we know that we have to have strategies for these different layers of the social ecology, so it's more like a portfolio of strategies that we're developing here. Then before we go full into deployment of our strategies, we believe very firmly that we need to pilot test those strategies. We want to start small, maybe pick a subset of our population and start there. Maybe it's a curriculum that we want to introduce into one high school. Perhaps it's a policy that we really thought we might go countywide with, but instead we're going to start it in one municipality before going wide, so that we can learn and refine as needed before we go into full deployment in step 6. Step 6 is really important. It's not a time where we just implement our strategies and sort of put our feet up, but rather we really dig in and we listen, because every prevention strategy, in my mind, creates some sort of conversation, and we and our coalition members should be there with us to guide that conversation, to be there to answer questions, to be able to steer people in the right direction. So we really want to dig in step 6, which is implementation. But we've got to do a lot of preparation to make folks comfortable steering that conversation. Step 7 is evaluation. We aren't waiting until step 7 to evaluate everything. We're actually planning our evaluation in step 1, and we're evaluating at every phase. You'll notice that social ecology is nested in the middle. It means that we're taking the social ecology into account at every single one of these steps. Now, the 3 words that you see around this process are 3 critical skills that we believe are very important and that we have focused quite a bit of our attention on. The first is leadership. Prevention is absolutely an act of leadership. It is imperative that we teach leaders how to do that balance of hope and concern in their community. It's not one or the other. We really need to grow a sense of concern so that there's engagement, but also provide a sense of hope so that people feel motivated and energized to engage in the work. We have to teach leaders how to lead across the social ecology, understanding that it's not enough just to talk about how do we reduce, let's say, underage drinking among youth, but how do we grow protection across the social ecology in order to really transform our community. And lastly, it's about cultivating that transformation. How do I plant seeds where transformation is more likely within this community so we have lasting change? Communication is the second skill that we believe is critically important. I doubt that there's a single prevention strategy out there that doesn't involve some sort of communication, whether or not it's a curriculum that is being done in the 9th grade, or it's our coalition advocating for public policy before city council. There's some sort of communication inherent in all of these strategies, and having effective communication is imperative. So we teach communication skills. And lastly, integration. This is about managing our portfolio of strategies. We know that we need a mix of programs and strategies, but how do they work together? Are any contradicting each other? Do we have too many sort of addressing the same thing? Do we have not enough? Do we need to fill in some programs where we have some missing? Do we need to refine certain programs that are maybe underperforming? So that's about, integration is all about managing that prevention portfolio. So again, just a high-level overview of our framework. One of the key things to keep in mind is that, again, it's an appreciative approach, which we believe really gives energy to your DFC work. As I was going through that 7-step process, you might have heard or drew some similarities between that and the Strategic Prevention Framework. Now, the SPF is the framework that you are to write your DFC grant around. So we'll go over those 5 steps very quickly. The first one is to assess prevention needs, so that assessment. 2 is to build prevention capacity. That's, of course, of yourselves and of your coalition. 3 is to develop your strategic plan, sort of how you're going to go about addressing the issues that you choose, what programs and strategies you're going to have in place. Step 4 is implementing those programs and practices. And step 5 is evaluating those outcomes, evaluating the efforts for the outcomes. All the while, we're constantly thinking about sustainability, right? How are we going to make long-term lasting change so that our change lives beyond the life of the grant? And then how are we incorporating cultural competence into each of these pieces? So just to draw some distinct similarities between the two processes, because I'm sure that you see that there are some, I wanted to just clarify here. We have added a couple of steps that we found to be critical to the success of any prevention effort. First, we believe that we've got to begin with quite a bit of planning and advocacy. We put that at the front. We put that as step 1. The advocacy is often required before we can ever conduct any sort of assessment. For example, you might be in this scenario where we need to invest quite a bit of time in developing a trusting relationship with a school before they ever allow us to come in and collect student data, or perhaps even for them to share data with us for our grant. The assessment phase also includes a careful inventory of the existing programs and strategies that we already have in place. So we call this mapping your prevention portfolio. These existing strategies and programs form our current portfolio, and they also help us, see where we need to refine and augment our practices. We actually address the SPF Step 3 planning into 2 different phases. First, we prioritize what we learned in the assessment and then develop a comprehensive portfolio of strategies based on what our opportunities were. Again, this is about that notion of there not being one program or strategy that has all of the solutions and is going to effectively eliminate drug and alcohol use in our communities, but rather it's more like silver buckshot where we need several programs and strategies in order to be effective. We also believe that programs and strategies should be pilot tested before going into implementation. So this is a new step here. We believe that there'll be much more successful implementation if we are able to run those on a small scale before a large-scale deployment. While we do not have a specific step for capacity building, we actually integrate it into absolutely every single one of these 7 steps. And in our workbooks and in our trainings, we offer key ideas around how you build capacity in each of these steps, not only in yourselves, but in that of the members of your coalition as well. So just a highlight of some of the similarities between the two so that you can see that connection as you're writing your proposal. So I wanted to give you that background so that when Molly starts to talk here about specifically writing for your grant, you know what that background is, but also know that you've got quite a bit more information in that handout that you were emailed, which was the overview section. And just one more thing, that you can listen to this again on our website at the Center for Health, or CHSC ulture.org. That's our Center for Health and Safety Culture.org. And you can also listen, you can also find on that website a longer overview of the positive culture framework as well. So now you can pull out that handout that you have that looks like the one on your screen, and I'm going to turn it over to Molly. And Molly is going to go through the project narrative section of that grant so you can specifically pull out some pieces that you might want to add. Molly, I'll hand it over to you.
All right. Thank you, Katie. Okay, so the project narrative section. So we know that FOA includes several other sections, but we'll be focusing primarily on how the positive culture framework can help you respond to the project narrative section of your proposal. And this is the 25-page section that contains these 5 areas responders are asked to respond to. So just a quick note before I walk through the handout that Katie just asked you to pull out. I just can't stress enough the importance of clearly responding to each sub-question within these 5 main areas. So the sample ideas for responding to each section that I'll be highlighting all correspond directly to one of the sub-questions within each of these 5 areas. And it might be tempting or feel easier or maybe even more logical to respond in a large narrative way to each of these 5 main sections, but I encourage you to all clearly provide a response to each subsection. And if necessary, maybe include a short amount of introductory or concluding language to kind of tie it all together, or provide additional information that addresses kind of the main question with each of these 5 categories. And I know it might feel like you're repeating yourselves, but I think it's really important that you follow the instructions and really clearly provide the information that they're asking you to address within not only each of these 5 main areas, but the sub-areas as well. So I'll pull examples from all of these main project narrative sections, but we'll spend the most time discussing how the Positive Culture Framework can help you develop that 12-month action plan, which is addressed in Section 3. So again, know that all of the information on the slides is being pulled directly from that handout that you just received. All right, next slide, please. All right. So there's a lot of information on this slide. We obviously don't have enough time to go over, but I want to walk you through this table so you have more context when you review the handout on your own and as I move through the remainder of the presentation. So in that far left-hand column, we've summarized what each section of the project narrative is asking responders to address. So this is not a word-for-word match of the language in the FOA, so please be sure to read that carefully. This is just kind of our interpretation of what they're looking for. In the next column, we've shared some ways the Positive Culture Framework can help you answer the questions they pose and how the model itself, the framework, can enhance your efforts. And in the third column, we've included some sample ideas that you could guide the development of your section or of each section, and that's kind of where I'll be spending the bulk of my time. And then lastly, we've listed some examples of Positive Culture Framework tools available to those who have, a formal relationship with the center. Next slide, please. Okay, so digging into the first section, the Coalition History and Member Involvement section, there really are so many ways that the Positive Culture Framework can build or enhance or maintain a strong coalition, but we only have so much time today, so I'll just discuss a couple of options for responding to subsection E, which is about membership. The Positive Culture Framework emphasizes the importance of training members on what we call coalition talking points, and that can help frame conversations. The framework itself can also help establish some shared hopes and concerns, like Katie talked about, and those are the things that really attract people to the coalition to begin with and keep them coming back. So it's the shared reasons that people come to the table and stay there. And we think the focus on a cultural approach helps members better understand the importance of their involvement. And, you may have heard that a coalition coordinator's job is really to help everyone in the community understand that prevention is a part of his or her job. And we really all do have a role to play in keeping kids safe and healthy. And the Positive Culture Framework can be really, really helpful in creating that member buy-in and that community-wide ownership, which is really crucial for community-level change. And developing some sample job descriptions is a really great way to clearly define roles and responsibilities and ensure that members' talents, skills, and expertise are being put to good use. So including these job descriptions in your proposal in this section, or maybe adding it as an appendix, that could highlight how members have real and meaningful ways to stay engaged. Next slide, please.
I'm going to stop you for a second because a great question came up relating to this specific issue, and I was trying to respond through the chat, but I'm unable to. So I'm just going to ask it right here. The question is it possible to seek a DFC to build a coalition if you don't already have one in place in your community? And I would say, and Molly, chime in as well, I think, they are looking for a group of people that's already sort of together to write this because it is very competitive. However, if you don't already have that in place, I would definitely discuss what your thoughts are and what your plan is for building that strong coalition. You might have a couple of stakeholders already in mind. You might gather them together and create some plans and use their names in the proposal and their descriptions. But you want sort of as many ideas planned out before you start writing this section. Anything else, Molly, that you wanted to add?
Yeah, I know they have made it a requirement that groups have meeting minutes and have been meeting for a minimum of, I believe, 6 months. So before you really dig in and invest a lot of time and energy into this proposal, because I know it's very labor intensive, I would read through the requirements section really carefully. I know that has been a requirement in the past, and I believe they require documentation that your group has been meeting for the past 6 months.
Good clarification.
So again, yep, and that again is a question that I would direct to SAMHSA and folks listed in the FOA as a contact for this opportunity.
Thank you. All right, I'm going to go to the next slide.
All right. So the tricky thing about this part of the application is that it takes a lot of time and energy and usually a fair amount of other resources to conduct a really comprehensive assessment and prioritization process that could form, this section and a statement of the problem. Most coalitions applying for a DFC are in need of those very resources. So it always makes me chuckle a little bit when I see how much information they're asking for from communities that aren't funded typically or maybe have very limited funding. The Center for Health Safety and Culture firmly believes in utilizing a well-thought-out, data-driven process to identify prevention priorities, and we know that takes time. The PCF team has a lot of vast experience in conducting assessments and supporting coalitions through community-level assessment work and can provide step-by-step guidance, which I know working as a DFC coordinator really benefited my community, having that support to hold you accountable and guide you through the process. But for the purposes of this application, however, it's likely that many coalitions will have to include preliminary data findings, especially at that local condition level. And it's our opinion that whatever data is available at the time, you should lay it out really clearly and prioritize it in your application. So in the 12-month action plan section, we'll talk more about how you can include plans for conducting a more comprehensive assessment and a prioritization process. But for now, the positive filter framework can help applicants move beyond kind of that individual level change by considering the opportunities, that exist across the social ecology. And we know that there are data available at each level of this social ecology. So some ideas we have for responding to this section include using a logic model or a similar visual to outline the relationship between the local conditions, the substance use problems, so those would be, the rates of use, related consequences like dropouts or suspensions. And this is something you can build off of as you answer subsection questions A, B, E, and F. So it might be something you start in section A and then you build in section B and you kind of keep adding to that logic model as you move through this section. You could discuss local condition data measures within the context of the various levels of the social ecology that Katie talked about. You could consider using tables not only to clearly provide the requested data, which we know is a lot of information they're looking for there, but also to summarize assessment efforts and data sources. So you could include a description of the data collection tools that were used, its methods, the target populations, time frames of the data collection efforts. And tables and charts are a really great way to include a large amount of information in an efficient way and maybe save you space, which we know is really limited in the project narrative. And the majority of reviewers also really love when data are well organized and they don't have to dig through the narrative to find it, and that's another reason why I recommend using some sort of chart to lay out your data and your data collection methods. And one other idea I want to highlight is how a data work group or a subcommittee of the coalition could be responsible for guiding the direction of future assessment efforts. And that could be, pulling together coalition members, or maybe it's folks who aren't able to commit to being a part of the coalition but are kind of the data keepers within your community. So somebody from the school, somebody from the police department, and those folks could all be members of the data work group. Next slide, please. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the project narrative section 3, which is the 12-month action plan. And we're breaking from the format here because there's just so much we wanted to discuss regarding the action plan. And this is really the heart of your application and where we think the PCF, or the Positive Culture Framework, PCF, might be most useful. And perhaps the most important benefit of the Positive Culture Framework is that it really does increase collaboration, which is goal number 1 of the DFC, and mobilizes a broad group of stakeholders by working across that social ecology, which allows the coalition to not just create change, but that deeper community-wide transformation, which again is what the DFC program is to do. Next slide. And the transformation we're seeking lies within our youth substance use rate, which is where goal number 2 comes in. And as we've already touched on, the PCF guides coalitions through an intentional, data-driven process to create a really comprehensive and outcome-based plan to reduce youth substance use. And that, again, is in really direct alignment with what the Drug-Free Community Support Program is looking to do. So we know the action plan needs to address, at minimum, these 2 goals, but we think it's also important to discuss in the application what prevention planning model you utilized in developing your application. So next slide, please. Thank you, Eric. So the FOA states that applicants must use an appropriate prevention planning framework for ensuring a comprehensive 12-month action plan. So that's language that's really clearly stated in the FOA in a couple of different places. And we would encourage you to include information in your proposal about utilizing this SPF, that strategic prevention framework, and briefly walk through the process your coalition went through to develop your action plan so the reviewers understand, how you landed where you did. And the reason we're recommending you utilize you discuss how you utilize the strategic prevention framework is because that is what the DFC program is looking for. They're looking for language around that framework. And like Katie said, we really see the benefit of utilizing the Positive Culture Framework because of the extra steps included, and we think it's a little bit more of a comprehensive process. But we know that reviewers are looking for that language around the strategic prevention framework. So discussing your prevention planning model could be done in 2 ways. As intro narrative to this section, so before you dig into the tables and the templates they provide, you could provide a couple paragraphs of narrative. Or if you're worried about kind of straying from the templates that they provided, or you don't think maybe that you've given enough attention to each of the steps, but you would like to, you could include the process itself as another goal and utilize the action plan table that they've provided to outline the process. And if you decide on the latter, each step of the process could have kind of its own objective and strategy and then a set of activities. And that's really where we could help by providing some comprehensive sets of activities within each of the steps to really lay out plans to move through the process in a comprehensive way. And if you prefer to stick to just the narrative, you could maybe just dedicate a paragraph or 2 to each step. So again, not surprisingly, we highly recommend using the Positive Culture Framework in combination with the SPF and the 7 strategies for change, though it isn't necessary to specifically name it as a planning framework because it's not a requirement of the grant. We would think it's important, however, to discuss how the coalition's Positive Culture Framework activities helped you prepare your application. So highlighting those activities will demonstrate that a really comprehensive and thoughtful process is utilized to prepare your proposal. And your handout includes a variety of sample activities for moving through each step of the Positive Culture Framework, but I won't be spending any time talking about those. All right, next slide, please. Okay, so there aren't specific sub-questions to respond to within the 12-month action plan section, but I'll discuss goals 1 and 2 separately. So I've already talked about how the Positive Culture Framework helps build collaboration, but some specific ideas for this part of your action plan might include naming strategies or activities around meeting with individual stakeholders to discuss their interests, their level of readiness, their perspective on barriers to doing prevention, their ideas for moving forward. And we know these one-on-one meetings, as we like to call them, are really powerful. And I would really encourage you all to consider writing those in, because that demonstrates your commitment to maintaining those relationships. You may want to address how new members will be brought onto the coalition. For example, describe any new member orientation procedures or materials you've developed or will develop. Another idea is to discuss how data can be used to build relationships. And we think that data use agreements can be and often are the first step in collaborating with some of our community partners. Next slide. Okay, so regarding your action plan for reducing youth substance use, the Positive Culture Framework, again, can help you create a really comprehensive plan. And some ideas for addressing goals too might be using assessment findings to draft SMART objectives. So those are objectives that are specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound. For each priority local condition, you could include some details about at least one or two strategies that you plan to employ to address that local condition. And we know that some local conditions require multiple strategies in order to effectively address it and create that true transformation. So make sure that is clear. And again, maybe using some sort of visual to discuss which local conditions are being addressed with which strategies might be really helpful. And in selecting strategies and drafting activities, attempt to incorporate as many of those 7 strategies for community-level change as appropriate. And be sure to include activities related to kind of those well-researched best practices or core fidelity components of your selected strategies. And that's really important for maintaining fidelity in the implementation phase. First, you have to know what those are and write them into your action plans before you can implement with fidelity. And include, another idea is to include activities related to building the necessary capacity or readiness or sustainability, and that would include securing resources, relationship building, obtaining technical assistance and training. Those are all really important components that should be written into your action plan as well. Next slide, please. All right, so before we move on to the evaluation section of the project narrative, we want to pause for just some really important reminders. So again, please read the instructions for each section really carefully. It's possible we've maybe misinterpreted the FOA, so be sure to ask an appropriate contact with the Drug-Free Community Support Program for clarification if you're confused about what you're being asked to do, or if you have questions about anything related to changes as a result of the new administration. Again, those are all questions that should be directed to the contacts listed in the FOA. Try to use the SMART approach to developing all objectives in your action plan, so including your action plans around building collaboration, so addressing goal 1 of the DFC program, and for implementing the Positive Culture Framework process. So we think that SMART approach can be really beneficial in all sections of your action plan. And when you review the handout, know that these are simply just ideas for responding to the project narrative section. There's no way of knowing exactly how reviewers will react to these ideas. So please just keep that in mind and use this handout as a springboard for developing an action plan that best meets your goals of your local coalition. These are just ideas we have. Okay, next slide, please. So the Positive Culture Framework really encourages evaluation throughout each of the 7 steps, but we need to explain that PCF staff members are not intended to serve as program evaluators. We get asked that question a lot, but our team does have extensive experience in data collection methods, and the framework offers many, many tools that are useful in monitoring the effectiveness of prevention efforts. And if we were writing this section, we would work both with a data work group that I talked about and an evaluator to determine how to measure progress specific to those strategies outlined in your action plan. And some strategies have really clear outcomes that they're intended to address. And it's really important that you identify both the outcome and process measures, and an evaluator can help you identify what those measures might look like to include in this section. And it would also be good to include pilot testing activities. We think the perfect place to do this would be in a master data collection plan, and that's something that would outline your methods, timeline, who's responsible, the tools you would use to evaluate strategies and measure change across all of the indicators that you're asked to measure. So the local conditions or your objectives, the goals, the 4 core measures they want you to track, and even measures of consequence data. So again, we would encourage you to include pilot testing activities in that data collection plan, but also specifically detail those plans in subsection C of this evaluation effectiveness section. And I would directly discuss how not only the implementation team, but maybe the data work group or the broader coalition would analyze the results and decide on enhancements for moving forward. The 7-step communication process, which is similar to the positive culture framework itself, and those 7 steps, but not exactly the same thing, would be especially helpful in developing an evaluation dissemination plan and a community engagement plan, and that could be explained in subsection B. Okay, next slide, please. All right. So we believe the 7-step process itself may be the most important factor to success in the implementation phase, and that's really because it guides coalitions through the necessary steps taken prior to implementing strategies. But the positive culture framework is unique in that it emphasizes the need to raise both hope and concern, like Katie talked about. And that leads to more mobilization and collaboration in the implementation stage. And when you focus only on those concerns, it can be really demotivating and, frankly, not very fun to be involved. So some ideas we have for responding to this section might be, and I know I've touched on this multiple times, but it's worth repeating that positive culture framework utilizes the social ecological model, and that ensures efforts are widespread enough to create that community-wide change, so not just in a tiny population, but across an entire community. And that's really what the DFC is looking for. And this section is the perfect place to discuss how the coalition's direct relationships or connections through its membership allow for, collaborative cross-sector efforts to be implemented across all those different levels of the social ecology. So again, that's just building a really well-rounded and comprehensive program. And in response to subsection B, you could discuss how the coalition has identified the community's strengths. And again, that's a new component to the 2017 FOA. They're really asking for information about what's positive and healthy in your community. And you could discuss how you plan to build upon those healthy behaviors and attitudes and strengthen your community. So that was exciting for us to see. You could also explain how coalition members and the folks who will actually be implementing each strategy are prepared to respond to the public's response after implementation begins. So whenever you introduce a new strategy, there's always going to be some community discussion about it. And it's really important that you prepare coalition members to respond to that discussion. And outlining those plans in this section of your proposal to demonstrate that you thought through the challenges that might pop up and you're prepared to meet them or address them head on. Additionally, it would be important to acknowledge within your proposal somewhere the importance of celebrating and communicating the coalition's successes and discussing plans for doing so on a regular basis. So, you might want to hold an annual meeting or a recognition ceremony or something annually to kind of celebrate success and talk about, what changes might need to be made and how you're going to move forward. So just acknowledging that in your proposal, that it's important to celebrate success, could be really helpful. And lastly, I just want to reiterate that these are just kind of ideas intended to help you get started. And you all know your communities best, and your coalition members undoubtedly have a plethora of, other ideas for your proposal. But whatever you do, we know that the Positive Culture Framework can provide some really excellent structure to the process of writing. And I know it's a beast, but it's worth it, and I wish you all the best of luck. Katie, I'll turn it back over to you at this point.
Thank you. It is sort of a beast, isn't it? But we appreciate, Molly, all of the suggestions that you've provided. We work with so many DFC communities across the country, not only just now, but have in the past, and they're using many of these ideas that Molly has shared. So please take a look at that worksheet. There's much more detail on the worksheets, or on the handouts that you have. And you can certainly ask any questions after the webinar by going to our website and submitting a question through that as well. So take a moment, review the materials that you have. Feel free to listen to the webinar again, which will be recorded on our website if you need. Know that we are here to support your efforts from the Center for Health and Safety Culture. So if you, we have, for those communities that are contracted with us, we have specific work plans for each of those 7 steps. We provide trainings and assessments, and then also ongoing support, like Molly had mentioned that their community had in the form of guide service, where we sort of walk through every single step with you. Our next training, I'm looking at the time here. I want to be sure that you guys are out of here on the hour. Our next full training that's open to anybody is in San Antonio in October. So you are welcome to take a look at our website for more information on that training. Also, if you're interested in having a training in your local community, we certainly do that as well. So just you can contact us through our website if you would like more information about any of our services, either the guide service, the assessments, or any of our training. You can certainly ask questions on our website. So with that, I know we only have about a minute left. I will open it up if there are any questions that somebody has just waiting to ask. And Erica, if you could unmute folks' phones if they...
Absolutely. And as a coalition coordinator, I was one of the communities that implemented the Positive Culture Framework within the DFC grant, and it really was something I found to be extremely helpful in our efforts. So if anybody has specific questions about that, know that you can reach out to me through the center as well about how that works and what it looks like.
Thanks, Molly. Well, we appreciate you taking the time to be with us today. Again, the webinar will be posted onto our website, but please do go to the website if you have additional questions or are looking for more resources. Thanks so much, and good luck on your proposals. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks.